Overtime with Avrum Weiss. Hi, Avrum. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Now, little question about your latest book. It's unusual to suggest that men are afraid of women. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, I came up with the idea with this sort of radical notion of listening to men. It's actually, to me, the question is more, how did the thousands of therapists before me not come up with the idea? Because I know they were listening to the same thing I was listening to, but somehow they missed it. Because to me, men are screaming this in so many different ways about their fears. It seemed almost like a billboard to me. It was, once I saw it, it was obvious.
Would you be able to give us one or two examples of the way that men are
Absolutely.
afraid of women?
I'll give you a very simple everyday one, which I think, unfortunately, most of us will recognize. Guy's at work and his friends say, let's go out for a beer afterwards. And it bothers him that the first thought he has is not, would he like to go out with his friends, but what?
Let me check with my wife.
Yeah, exactly. And that bothers him. And the reason it bothers him is that his wife has never asked him to check with her. She's never indicated in any way that she doesn't want him to have friends. In fact, she's worried he doesn't have friends and has been trying. In fact, she'd be delighted. But still, he's afraid that she will disapprove of him, even though she's given no evidence of him. It bothers him that his first thought is being afraid of her disapproval.
Wow, I have a feeling we're going right back to our earliest days of getting approval from mother.
That's exactly where it comes from. Exactly. And the difference between men and women is that if you're heterosexual, you end up marrying somebody who's the same gender as your mother. And so that's why these fears get stirred up for us in a way that's different from women. You wonder why women's relationships with each other are so volatile and emotionally charged for the same reason that our marriages are.
And so how do men's fears play out in couples that you've observed? And perhaps it's the red light, but it's also perhaps the amber light and perhaps the green light. And what can men do to move through those lights of
I'll tell you
influence?
I'll tell you an example of what frequently happens, the argument I hear about all the time in couples, and how thinking about it as being about men's fears unlocks the conflict. So the arguments between men and women are often start about something fairly concrete. You didn't do this, or you don't do that. And it's usually the woman who's making the complaint. And there's good reason for women to be making complaints, because in general, relationships don't work as well for women as they do for men. If you look at the data, single women are happier and healthier than married women, but married men are happier and healthier than single guys. So marriage works better for women. So they're the ones who are more likely to make a complaint. The problem is that they know from experience what they really want to talk about is the relationship. But they know from painful experience that if they try to talk about the relationship, they're just going to get a wall. So instead, they sort of speak in code and say, you don't ever want to hang out with me. You don't ever want to, why can't we just watch a movie and snuggle on the couch? No matter how carefully she expresses it, he hears that as a criticism. Criticism is the number one word I hear men use when talking about their relationships. Why does he hear it as a criticism? Well, I think most people would say he's insecure, he's guarded, he's defended, but they don't understand why. And the reason why is men are socialized to believe that their value is completely dependent not on who they are, but on what they do for other people. And part of their jobs is to protect and provide for women. So if your partner says that she's unhappy about something, that's like getting an F in school. That means you failed in your job. So she thinks that they're talking about getting closer, and he thinks they're talking about him being inadequate and a failure. So he has a big reaction to that, which she doesn't understand, because all she said is, can we watch a movie? And so they're working at cross purposes and not understanding his defensive fear is why they're not understanding each other.
This is great. Would you share a little bit of what research, because you've of course been a therapist, and when you're speaking, I'm really going to one of my backgrounds, and that's the love languages is probably the book that I've recommended the most to
Yeah.
at least to help people understand that different people love and want to be loved in different ways.
Right.
Is that something that you've noticed is relevant, or is that something that can help men understand more varieties of ways to love?
Absolutely, because the way men are socialized to express love, if you think of what I just said about it's not who you are, but what you do.
Yes.
So men are socialized. If you watch your father, the way he expressed love to your mom was through acts of service.
Yes.
And so men unconsciously believe that if I'm doing for you, I've got the bases covered. So if I'm doing for you, but you're complaining that I'm not snuggling on the couch with you, it's like, wait a minute. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And then you hear men say things like women are impossible to please. They're always moving the goalposts because they wanted to stay simple and concrete. You gave me a list of 6 things to do. I did the 6 things, but you're still upset with me. Because the 6 things were not the...
And the way that women tend to connect is that they speak, and that's their type of therapy. Whereas a man, when they hear a woman speak, it's often they're looking for a task or an assignment, something that they can go and check off because that's how we've been socialized. And so, and that list, it never seems to disappear for men who, when the woman's speaking, the best strategy for the man is just to sit there and listen, or be a intensive and maybe an engaging conversationalist.
Well, if your boss said to you every week for a month, you're late on your report, most people at work would then get the report in a day early. But somehow men in that situation, I tell men all the time, you could stop this anytime you want. All you have to do is respond to what she's asking proactively before she asks it. You'll never hear this complaint again. But it doesn't usually occur to men because they're on the defensive, because they're trying to manage their fears. And so they're not thinking about how to get closer. They're thinking about how not to get in trouble.
What would be 1 or 2 ways that you feel men can do to become even better communicators?
Well, the simplest thing to me, particularly in conflict, it's cliched, but it's so valuable, is if you're talking about the other person, you're on the wrong track. If you're talking about yourself, it's really hard to get in trouble. So if you say, I feel criticized when you have a list of 6 things for me to do. Let me change that. It's not, you're wrong when you give me a list of 6 things to do. That's not going to go anywhere. But if you say, when you give me a list of things to do, I start to feel like you don't really care about me. And like all I am to you is somebody to get, that's going to be a productive conversation. And the difference, it's not only talking about yourself, but doing so in a way that's not quite as guarded, but being a little more forthcoming.
And I guess, what can men and women do about fears?
Well, introducing the idea to a couple that the man might be scared is a powerful change. Let me read you a quote from a woman who was in a workshop on this topic. She said, I understand that my husband has not been ignoring, dismissing, or hurting me out of a lack of respect, as I suspected, but that he's scared. He's scared to hurt me. He's scared to mess up with me. He's scared to not be enough. I had honestly never imagined that he was scared and that I was so profoundly important to him that he was constantly terrified I would leave him. So that understanding alone is a powerful starting place for couples. Moving to another level, for men, their go-to defense is withdrawal and guardedness. And so men have to learn. So men get scared, and the way they respond to that is by withdrawing. So men have to learn other ways to soothe themselves when they're scared in order to learn how to lean into the relationship rather than withdrawing. And so those other ways might be calling a friend, being a part of a men's group, having other people they can turn to help them when they're in distress so that they can hang in the relationship rather than pulling back.
Great advice. What are ways that right now we know that the issues for men between the ages of 45 and 60 are probably at the worst levels ever, with suicide, with depression,
incarceration.
What do you see as some of the roads or some of the steps that can bring them from this fear into the curiosity, the expression, the creativity that could assist them on their journey?
You know, I took a chance in the book and I did something I'm a little unsure about, but I gave a roadmap to men how to set up a support group with other men. I was a little unsure about it because I'm used to being there to make sure things go okay. And the idea of like giving them a manual, I'm not quite sure about that, but I think it's important enough that it's worth trying. So basically, there's a sort of step-by-step guide for men, who to pick, how to find them, and how to start a support group. And that is a profound, life-changing event for most men. The surprise for me has been, you know, I worked as a therapist for a lot of years and thought about men as difficult to work with and withholding and not talking about themselves. I run men's groups and they're at least as open with each other as women are. When you get the women out of the room, men desperately want to talk to each other.
I'm hearing men helping men.
Yes,
that's what
absolutely.
I'm hearing. And I have a rhythm to it because a friend of mine from Perth created a gong, and he wants to bring men into a gong circle where they'll come together and they'll ring the bell, and then he can actually take them through if they want to create their own bell. And it will be, again, men helping men through sound healing.
You know, I ask men all the time, do you have friends? And they say to me, oh yeah, sure, I have friends. And then I say, no, when I say friend, I mean somebody you would talk to about the things you talk to me about. And they're like, oh no, I don't have anybody like that. And, you know, we're learning more and more. Loneliness is as big a predictor for early mortality as smoking cigarettes. If your doctor were doing his job by the research, when you went for your checkup, they would also ask you, so how's your relationship life going? Do you have friends? Do you spend time with people? Do you have people? That would be as important as asking you, do you use drugs? How much do you drink? But we don't ask about that, but it's really the data on men's health. I read something the other day, you know, women live longer. So if men lived as long as women, the number of lives saved would be more than all the people who die a year of cancer. But we have God knows how many hundreds of $1 million, which we should, into researching cancer, but what are we doing for men to help them? And more of them are going to die.
The market is definitely appearing to be growing as more men are falling off. Homelessness in Canada is epidemic. It's you talked about incarceration because you've worked in the prisons. Do you see pathways to reintegrate men who have fallen off, and perhaps one or two other tips that can assist them in their journeying back, including ways to even get these men out of their caves and back into circles, or ways of volunteering, or like you've suggested in the earlier chapters?
Any of the above. It doesn't matter how you do it. Everybody has their own way. But at this point, the data is so overwhelmingly clear. When you take what you're thinking and feeling and you speak it, you have to process it in your mind first. So it's like basically taking food and chewing it. You don't get the nutrients out until you chew the food. So when you talk to somebody, you're chewing your food and you can get the nutrients out. So you can talk to your neighbor, you can talk to your friend, you can talk to your pastor, you can talk to your golf buddy, but you got to talk to somebody.
And I love this because I believe a similar thing happens is when you write it. And
Yeah,
so the
absolutely.
speaking it, the writing it, the drawing it, the singing it, the dancing it,
Yep.
these are all ways to get
Same
out
things
of
happen.
and then what tends to happen, I guess, from your perspective, because I have a feeling you've done this research because you've done thousands of cases. Like, is it simply self-confidence and self-esteem shifts, or is it something neurochemical or
No,
neuroplasticity shifts, or
it's men are afraid of parts of themselves. So 125 years ago, psychologists first started talking about men being afraid of their own femininity. In cultures around the world, have a recurring image of a vagina with teeth. In Spanish, they call it vagina dentata. So why do so many cultures have this image? That's men's fears of women. What's the story of the Garden of Eden? That's men's fears of women. What's the story of Pandora? What's the story of Delilah? What's the story of Ulysses? Men have been talking about fears of women as long as there have been men telling stories. So it's transformative to begin to acknowledge the fears, because it's parts of ourselves that we're scared of. In our culture, to look feminine in any way, shape, or form is to be judged to be not masculine. And so if we can help men to embrace their warmth, their tenderness, their interested in connection, their vulnerability, it's a game changer. It's a complete game changer.
I thank you. That's so useful from an understanding, yet also it triggers more curiosity. And so the work that I've done quite a bit with is Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. And I'm hearing the hero's journey in what you just said, because that dark side is the side of the man who goes into the unknown and is afraid, yet when they come out through the other side, they've got their new superpower.
Yes, because they go into the unknown and what they find is themselves. That's the terrifying part. I've just finished a wonderful book called When Boys Become Boys. And it's a woman who moved into very intimate contact in a small school. She was there from pre-K through first grade, and she spent hundreds of hours with these boys. And she painfully documents the moment in kindergarten when they stop being themselves and start pretending to be the boy that they think they have to be for their friends to like them. And she tells this story about a kid. All the kids were supposed to go up in front of the class and say what their favorite song they learned all year was. And this boy stood up in front of the class and started to say, well, my favorite song was the lullaby we learned. And he looks down and he sees the boys in the front row mocking him. And he says, oh, just kidding. It's from the halls of Montezuma. Changes on the spot, hides that part of himself. And you can just see how that would carry forward in his life.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Have you addressed that in ways that can assist men through the traumas and moving and letting go of those demons? Or what would be a metaphor that you might use or share to assist people looking to release that trauma?
I think a metaphor that is maybe a little, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about it as PTSD, but the metaphor that I've been using has to do more with attachment. So really what we're talking about is insecure attachment for men. We're talking about fear of believing that they are not inherently lovable, and that so that most men worry, at least unconsciously, that they'll be abandoned, that they're again being valued only for what they do, and not, if I lose my job or I get sick or some younger guy comes along, if I'm not taking care of you, why would you want to be with me? Why would you value me?
When you see the homelessness that, I don't know if you've been to California or some of the biggest cities in North America, and I just watched a TVO in Ontario program that homelessness right now for men between the ages of 45 and 65 is going out of control in Toronto, Ontario. and that men are sitting 2 paychecks away from becoming homeless. Can you share perhaps ways that we can explore private public policy to make an impact or a difference in this area?
Well, I think private policy has to do with exactly what we're talking about. How many families who are that close to homelessness are relying entirely on a man who, in a sort of macho way, is saying, I've got to take care of it all myself? And how much less of a risk would they be at if there were a partnership between the man and the woman taking the burden on equally? So I think it does follow.
And again, is there some light ways that we might be able to assist men in a couple's relationship that might be the way that you see as positive yet playful, yet a way that can lighten up the tension or stress or fear that many men experiencing or are experiencing today?
Well, it's a rough first step to say to a woman, I'm scared. But things get incredibly lighter when you do. So if you can take my word for it, if you stop defending yourself and you just say something that's more revealing, it's like a burden lifted.
I get triggered with vulnerability, how powerful vulnerability can be for a man. Stepping into the vulnerability, stepping into the ownership of being afraid.
Right. And of course, it flies in the face of every way that we're socialized, which is to not need anyone, be self-reliant, not be dependent, not be vulnerable, be on your own. That the whole history of the United States is a myth of self-reliance, where people who came from Europe to have our own lives, and the pioneers and the homesteaders who had an axe, and made their own way, those are our heroes in this country. That's who we revere, people who didn't need anybody.
Thank you so much for your time today. Can you please share again ways that people can reach you, can reach
Sure.
out to your book, and maybe a last thought for today's session?
Sure. The book is Hidden in Plain Sight, How Men's Fears of Women Shape Their Intimate Relationships. It's on Amazon. You can reach me at agweiss, which is AGWEISS at Comcast.net. And also there's a Facebook group. And if you just go to Facebook and put in the search bar, Men's Fears of Women, you'll find the group. And people are posting there about their experiences. I'm hoping that eventually, as people read the book, that they'll start their own support groups. And I want that Facebook group to be a clearinghouse for men to be able to talk to each other about it. And I guess the ending thought would be sort of what we were talking a little while ago. It doesn't matter who you talk to, but talk to somebody. Really, literally, not only your happiness depends on it, but in many profound ways, your life does.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been a pleasure and an honor to chat, and wishing you an absolutely brilliant month and year ahead.
Thank you. Good to talk with you.